is going to be an Oklahoma ARRL update. We've got Lee Cooper and Kevin Odell and John Stratton sitting in the waiting room. I'll turn them on here to bring them up to the group and welcome all, and we'll see what we can come up with. All right, click the button and they should be joining shortly.
I was beginning to wonder.
That's right. There you are. 9 o'clock.
Well, you wanted to make certain we didn't show up.
John, you don't have a video for the folks, but you're there. There you go. Welcome, and take it away, Kevin, and enjoy the presentation.
And Mark, you're going to pick up the questions, right?
I will pick up the questions, and if anybody has any questions, that's a good point. Live, stick them up there, and we will transfer them along to the folks in real time. So if you have something, we'll interrupt and say hi to get those questions through. But I'll pass it along to you fine folks. I think who's going to start, Kevin or John?
Kevin will start.
Kevin is our section manager for Oklahoma, so we will pass it on to him. Go ahead, Kevin.
And good morning, everyone. This is, I think, kind of a nice way to do something other than the situation that we've got. Kevin Odell, N0IRW. I'm your Oklahoma section manager, and on the screen with me is John Stratton, N5AUS. He is the director for the West Gulf Division, and Lee Cooper, W5 LHC, is the vice director. And I haven't seen Lee in a little while, so hi, Lee. But things in the section right now are pretty slow. I mean, for obvious reasons. We haven't had any ham fests, and though we did have some successful field day operations, but other than that, I mean, things are pretty quiet. We haven't had any MCOM related issues. So it's been pretty quiet where the section's concerned. So that, and I have really good people involved that take care of the issues that we do have. So I will, at this point, go ahead and turn it over to John, because he has stuff to talk about, especially since they just had a board meeting, which was new for them the way they did it. So John, go ahead and take it.
Kevin, thanks. And Kevin's right. This is the Chinese virus has changed how amateur radio and the league operate dramatically. And of course, you were introduced to Lee Cooper, and there's nothing real formal about how we're going to do this. If you have questions, send the questions in, and either Mark Klein will forward the questions to us, or if he lets you speak, we'll try to answer all your questions. We'll cover some topics, but we'll stop at any point that you have questions about any part of the section, the division, or the league itself. There is one thing we announced, that if you've been to previous forums run by Kevin or at HAMCOM, we always give out door prizes. It's a little difficult to hand you a prize over the screen. So what we're going to do is that if anyone joins or renews their membership between this Saturday and next Saturday, we're going to ship a free book, free cap, like we have in inventory, to you. If you renew your membership between now and next Saturday, send an email to either me or to Lee and tell us that you renewed your membership. We'll get it confirmed with headquarters and get it shipped to you. With regard to the league itself and amateur radio nationally, the Chinese virus has completely changed what we've done. I think up until this point, all hamfests across the country have been canceled. The last one in the West Gulf, I think, Lee, if you're right, was Belton? No, it was Beavermark in Rosenberg, correct?
The last one canceled? Well, we canceled.
Last one that was held.
Oh, yes, well, held. Yeah, that was Houston.
And I think this is, at least we know in the West Gulf, maybe in the country, this is the first Hamfest held by Zoom. Now, there is a large Hamfest being planned on August 8th and 9th, I believe, called QSO Today, put on by a group that's not connected to the league, but it's an affiliated Hamfest with us. That one is going to be fairly large, but this is the first divisional level Hamfest we believe that has been held by Zoom. As far as we know, almost all clubs are have been up and down meeting by Zoom or Teams. Mark, you said that one of the clubs in Oklahoma is going to meet soon in person. Is that correct?
We've the SCARS meeting have been the last 2 months. We have been in person,
Okay.
and we have had mask requirement. We've had a physical separation requirement, and we've also had Zoom and YouTube. So for our meetings, it usually ran about 70 folks. We still have about 75 folks, but we've got about 14 or 15 in person, about 17 on Zoom, and about 35 on YouTube that have come in. So we've kind of got a hybrid approach, and looks like it's still on electronics at this time.
What's interesting from around the country, the clubs have been holding meetings by Zoom. All of them have reported increased attendance. More people attended the meetings by Zoom than they did previously in person. And a lot of clubs are reporting increased membership applications. So it's been detrimental in one way, but it's been beneficial in another, that there are more people developing an interest in amateur radio. Maybe they're concerned about the ability to communicate. Some have said it's because they have more time, but membership in clubs is going up across the country because of this. There's also an increased request to take the exams, which has caused a little bit of difficulty since we have not been able to hold recently live exams. So the virus has accelerated the efforts to develop online testing across the country. A few online testing sessions have been held. The last report to the league is the software isn't yet complete yet. It's easy to do one, maybe two at a time, but to do multiple people at a time in a testing session by online has not yet been worked out by anyone in the amateur community of which we have knowledge. There are commercial applications that will permit you to do it online, but they're very expensive. And instead of paying $14 to take an exam, it might cost $200 to take an exam. So we're still working, the league's working on it, and a lot of private groups are working on a way to no matter where this virus goes and when we come back to being able to do everything online, in person, we'll be able to provide some online testing. And it's also accelerated the league's efforts to computerize the VE process so that all exams and applications are handled by computer, but that's still being worked on at the IT level. As Mark pointed out, or Kevin pointed out, the league held the first electronic meeting of the board of directors in 106 years. It was held on Friday the 17th. All the directors, vice directors, and officers attended by Zoom. Normally these meetings take 2 days. This meeting was completed in 1 day. So it's arguable that doing it by Zoom increased the efficiency of the meeting. And as most of you may know or may not, depending on how you follow QST and the emails coming out, the league shut down on March 23rd. Connecticut became a hotspot, and Connecticut ordered all businesses, including the league, to close. I think we had about a week's notice to shut down. We had to scramble in order to provide enough computer equipment to all of our employees so they could work remotely. We had at the time, I believe, 80, Lee, if I'm correct, 85, 87 employees at the time. We managed to keep every one of our employees. We didn't have to let anyone go. All but 12 employees at headquarters were able to work remotely. 12 that weren't able to work remotely were because they were either running W1AW, they couldn't be there, or they were in shipping or some other function that did not require access to data and computers. I believe we're now back at 50%. On May 20th, Connecticut said businesses could come back at about 25%. We're now been allowed to increase staff to 50%, but we're subject to extremely stringent disinfectant requirements and distancing. And if you've had anything that you wanted from the league delayed, it's because There's been nobody there. All paper processing stopped because no one was at headquarters to pick up the mail. Shipping that normally had 5 people at work every day went down to 1 person because of Connecticut requirements. So whatever was supposed to be shipped is running behind. And
About a month.
Sir?
About a month.
Mm-hmm. And we're still at 50%. We don't know when we're going to be allowed to go back to 100%, if we will be, because we're still subject to distancing and disinfecting requirements. And it's difficult to fit the entire staff into a building when you have to maintain the distancing requirements we've got. But one unique thing about the virus, what it's proven, at least with regard to the league, because this has been a point of contention for some time, is whether or not we could have employees that do not have to live in Connecticut. And since everyone's been working from home, including the CEO, including all the department heads, I think what this has proven is that we now can operate the entire league remotely if we need to. And that's become a component of the job applications for new employees. So it also establishes that we're no longer location bound. It means that we can operate, the league can operate from anywhere in the country. If you've looked at your QST, you'll see that the number of advertisers has declined. A lot of businesses across the country have reduced their advertising. Same thing happened to the league. We've had a number of advertisers put their advertising on hold until the fall, until they see how this turns out. The league was able to obtain one of the PPP loans you've heard about. Obtaining that loan helped the league keep all its employees on staff at full pay, and it's prevented the league from taking a more serious economic loss. So that's what the virus has done to the league. One other thing it did was affect field day. And because of the limitations across the country on the ability to gather in groups and the requirements for social distancing, we had a lot of requests to change the field day rules. Because as all of you know, Class D stations, home stations, were not going to be permitted to be counted in the past. This issue came before the Programs and Services Committee 3 different times. Programs and Services Committee is the committee that's charged with overseeing contesting all member services. The first time the issue came up, it turned it down. We brought it back before PSC. It failed a second time. Within about a month of field day, we decided this was silly. A group of us decided it was kind of silly. And we brought it back for a third time. And this time it was approved. So all Class D stations were permitted to participate and count. The difference is, I think, Lee, it's your turn. It knocked it out of the park. Last year, there were 3,113 logs submitted for field day. As of this morning, there are 9,581 logs that have been submitted. We don't know the number of participants or the total number of Q slips so far, but that is, the result is we've had 3 times the number of logs submitted for field day. And the question has arisen whether or not those rules will remain for next year. We don't know yet. Last year we had 789 Class D stations turn in logs. This time we've had 7,300 Class D stations turn in logs. So we expect that the total number of participants will be dramatically higher. So they'll come back up before the board in January whether or not we keep the field day rules as they are. Mark, before we keep going, do you have any questions at this point?
I do have a question. 2 things. One's a statement that the Mid-Dell folks have been meeting in person at a park in a change of venue for them, which is a good way to do that. Hadn't seen that. Thanks for Aaron and Galen pointing that out. But that's an external activity for the meetings. And then the second one, I have a question from Dan. Let's see, Dan WF5ZT that says, John, how did you vote on the termination of Dr. Michael or Michelle? I don't remember the pronunciation on that.
It's Dr. Nickel.
Okay. Thank you. That was the question coming through.
For those of you who don't know, Dr. Howard Nickel, was hired in September of 2018 to replace Tom Gallagher as CEO. And Dr. Nickel remained CEO from September 2018 until January of 2020. His contract came up for renewal in January 2020, and the contract was not renewed. The answer to your question, Dan, is that, let me think, I have to pause because we were under Connecticut human resource rules. Other than telling you that the board made a decision not to renew his contract, I'm not going to be permitted to go under privacy laws to go into details about that. But your question was more limited. It was how did I vote? And my vote was to not renew Dr. Nickel's contract. Dan, did you have another question to follow up on that one?
Nothing yet. We'll see. Nothing yet, but we'll see if he comes through with something. And that was his specific question. And I understand the privacy laws, and I know they're different by state. So
while we're talking about CEO, when Dr. Nickel's contract was not renewed, that meant we had to have someone as executive director manager to run the league in the meantime. We reached out to Barry Shelley, who had served as interim CEO for the period of time between when Tom Gallagher quit and we hired Dr. Nickel. After Dr. Nickel was hired, Barry went home to what he thought was a well-earned retirement in South Carolina until we called him in January and said, come back. Barry agreed to come back and has been serving as interim CEO from January. He'll continue to serve as interim CEO until the board picks a new chief executive officer. That process has been going on since January. A committee was formed to accept applications and to interview the candidates and then to recommend finalists for the board to approve. We are at the stage, and this was discussed at the board meeting held on the 17th, where the number of candidates has been narrowed. The board is going to meet in about 30 days to meet with the finalists. And after the meeting with the finalists, the board is going to convene again to discuss the finalists and to make a determination, if we can, who we're going to recommend to be hired as the new chief executive officer or executive director. The titles may change. In about this, so we'll have a new chief executive officer or executive director in about 90 days. Within the same 90 days, we will also, for the first time, have a director of emergency communications. In the past, although by law, amateur radio is charged with serving the nation and localities as the backup emergency communication service. It's the reason we have ARRLs and NTS. It has never been given the prominence the numbers to believe it should have at headquarters. In January of 2019, the board, at my request and a number of other directors, created a new position, which is Director of Emergency Communications. Before, the person who handled emergency communications and worked with field service was merely a staff member. In January of 19, we created the position of Director. That person now reports directly to the CEO and to the board, and is responsible for all emergency communications operations. We have been going through a selection process. We're down to the final part of that selection process, and we should be able to announce who the new Director of Emergency Communications is within the next 90 days, perhaps less. One other new position that we've created after meeting with a lot of clubs last year is a club coordinator. In meeting with clubs, these meetings were meetings that I set up with Lee, and we met with a lot of clubs around the state. And our questions as the new director and vice director, what did the clubs need and what had the league not been doing for the clubs? What came out of that is that we learned that headquarters, which used to supply a lot of support for the clubs, had stopped doing that. And it made it difficult for all the clubs to bring in new members, keep new members, develop new programs. As a result of that, at the January meeting, the board requested that a position called National Club Coordinator be created. Most sections have club coordinators. This club coordinator's responsibilities are different. The new one at headquarters is charged with reinstituting the programs that used to be available for the club, developing new programs to help the club, and provide actual training programs on special programs for the club. That position was to have been filled by January of this year, or I'm sorry, by about February this year. But when the Chinese virus hit us, all new hires were put on hold. So it will be January before we hire the club coordinator. Mark, you have any more questions regarding these positions?
Hello.
Nothing regarding those positions, but I have Dan had a question, or Dan replied that that was answered his question. But we've got a question regarding field day from Galen Kitch, an emergency communication manager, WX5 MOR. Says, if the field day rules are to remain include the expanded D section stations, do you see any modifications to them? I know there have been some comments about the power, etc.
Comments about what now?
Comments about the power, the rules as they may apply next year. Any changes?
Okay.
Have we learned anything, I guess, is the thing from this? Do we need to change power requirements and those kind of things?
Well, you can always wonder whether Kevin, Lee, or I learned anything, but whether the rules will stay the same with regard to Class D stations and power limitations is something that's not known yet. Again, that there is a great deal of resistance to changing the field day rules this time, but we managed to persuade the majority of the board and the Program Services Committee that we should do it for this year because of unique circumstances, because people were prohibited from gathering. Because of what appears to be at this point a remarkable increase in the number of people who participated, there's a fairly strong argument that the rules should remain the same for next year. Once we get all the reports in of how many people participated, how many queues were made by everyone, I suspect that PSC will take it back up in its fall meeting. The league has, in between, the league meets, the board meets twice a year, once in January, once in July. In the interim period, the board has committees that deal with whatever issues come up. There are two what they call standing committees and the executive committee. The executive committee is elected. There are 5 directors elected to it every January. You have the administration and finance committee that does just that. It handles all administration and finances issues in between the board meetings. Then Programs and Services Committee, which at this point handles all member services and emergency communications, which I'll don't wait forget to talk about that because it's important, another item working. Those committees meet at each board meeting and at least once in between the board meetings. So they have 4 meetings. PSC will meet, I think, in October and November of this fall. And the issue of should we retain or change or modify the field day rules will come back up. There will be fairly strong support for keeping at least Class D rule. Did you have another question, Mark? Did I?
No, I don't. But what I see as a good opportunity is to collect some feedback from folks. Who would do, if somebody had some feedback? You know, I guess personally, I'm so aghast at the fact that we had 9,500 people jump into field day from home. I think that's just wonderful.
Well, actually, Mark, let me make it clever.
Yep.
We had 9,581 logs turned in as of this morning. Last year, we had 3,113 logs. 7,500 of the logs so far were for Class D stations.
And you know, obviously that's a change. Who would the best be the one to receive any feedback that somebody has? You know, like if a club or somebody has some passion feedback, would they visit you or PSC or somewhere in the headquarters?
Well, if you're complaining, send it to Kevin. Okay. Don't smile, Kevin.
Thanks.
The best answer is there is no real good address for PSC at this point. You can send it to the chairman of PSC, who's Matt Holden, and his email address is listed on page 15 of QST. But if you do that, send your comments, good or bad, to Lee and to me. Our addresses are published also on page 15 on everything else. Send us an email. Tell us you liked it, you didn't like it, you want to change it. Let us know what we can do. I mean, what the board does, what Kevin can do, is an attempt to provide whatever the members need. And if we don't know, we can't do something. So whether it's good comments, bad comments, complaints, send them to us. It'll help us, because there will be a real big discussion over field day rules next year.
There is one big question, at least that I have within those numbers.
Yes, sir.
And that is, if you take the previous year's numbers, how many participants does that cover versus this year's number?
That's what we don't know.
You may have X number of logs, you know, because you've got one set of logs from a club that may have, you know, 15, 20 people involved. And that same 15 or 20 people may have all sent in separate logs as Class D stations because the club didn't meet. That becomes the real question there.
And I was going to say, and you know, Kevin, you're right on track. We are hoping next year people will gather back together again. And so, yes, I would expect that number to drop drastically next year because people will start to get back and have their barbecue and hang out and do all the other stuff that we do at field day just besides contests and stuff. But you're absolutely right. The number of stations is one reason is everybody's doing individual logs rather than one station stuff, doing a common log and stuff. So it'll be interesting whether we need to change because we'll just drop back to a normal scenario next year, do that and stuff. And so, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns in there, exact number of logins, but how much difference were there really in number of participation?
Yeah, and Kevin, we don't know yet because the logs are still coming in.
Right.
Well, the only number we know that we can identify, the only numbers we can identify, are the number so far per class of logs, total number of logs, but we can't yet tell the total number of contacts and total number of participants. That'll be a factor in what we do with regard to the rules. I mean, last year we had 789 Class D logs turned in. And as we discussed, we now have 7,200 Class D logs. So that's either in addition of more people participating because they could work from home, or as Lee pointed out, it could be just a reflection of people who would have shown up at a gathering for a club who did it from home. And Mark, I think you said your club had the same number of queues as it had before, even though you had fewer people.
Right. We had about 1,970 QSOs for 2019 and 2020, both of them. We had about 100 to 150 people involved, and I think that's the big difference. You had about 100 to 150 people that came to eat and do all those kind of things that were there active last year in 2019. This year we had, I think it was 10 that we had that were there at the site this year. We pulled the same number of QSOs, which for an emergency communication thing is really, really neat to see that we can get it done with a smaller number of people. But we had, so far we've got 15 people that have put in logs under the club's name. And I know there's probably half a dozen more that are under other names that would have been at field day last year. It'd be interesting. We don't collect the data. I know nobody does, but if you count the number of QSOs or the number of hours that people sat in front of the radio, I'm guessing that's way up, because I know our field days usually have 3 people operating, and they have 97 or to 147 people eating or talking or doing something. So, the bands were crowded. I was on for 6-7 hours straight, and it was amazing to work tons and tons of stations.
We'll find out. We'll probably know within about a month. We'll be able to answer the question: total number of queues and total number of participants. Was there another question in there, Mark?
Yep, just got another one popped in. Says, from Vince K0DKR, may a single Class D station operator contact for QSO credit a station operated by a club of which that person is a member if that person never participates from that club station during field day? And I think that's the complicator for next year, is that if you let home users come by this club station and operate and then go home, in the past that's been frowned upon. But what's your thinking on that?
As I understand the rules, that will not be permitted. You can, this year you're permitted to aggregate your score with your club score. But next year, I don't think you're going to be able to participate and contact the club and count it. You only get one pass.
You only get one pass. Either work from the club or you work from home is what it's been in the past, and that's the difference.
Same thing, yeah. One other thing, Lee, why don't you talk about, because this will tie into the legislature, why don't you talk about spectrum defense a little bit, and then we'll come back and talk about where we are with the HOA bill. Okay,
I can do that. By the way, I have to comment, Kevin started off by saying things were slow up in Oklahoma, and I'm sitting here watching up here. We got our first Cat 1 hurricane hitting the coast of Corpus Christi right now, and 2 more behind it down in the Gulf. So it looks like, we're going to have 3 in a row coming in at us and stuff. I'm sitting here wondering, what's the rest of 2020? Are we going to get the zombie apocalypse, or are we going to get the alien invasion from Mars? What's next on our list?
Lee, better you than me.
Hey, we'll take the rain, As Tom Whiteside always used to sit there and say, and he's up here in the Austin area, we will gladly sacrifice Houston for some good rain up here in Austin area. And he got all his stuff. So there is that. So okay. So what I said I would do today is I want to kind of preach to the choir a little bit, but I want to talk about something. And you guys may have heard this before, but I'll bring it up because I think it's worth repeating. What do you believe is the actually number one thing that you must have in order to participate in amateur radio? By and far, no anything but the number one thing you must have to participate. Think about that for a second, because you could sit here and say, well, I need a fancy radio. I don't need a fancy radio. I need to, do this or do that. All that, we've got stuff. But the one thing that you've got to have, guys, otherwise it's all gone, is spectrum. If I don't have a frequency to operate on, then the rest of my equipment, my station, all the rest of the stuff is really moot, isn't it? It doesn't really matter anymore. And the thing about spectrum is it's valuable. It is extremely valuable right now. We have estimated that our bands, if they were ever to be put up for auction, would probably sit there and settle the national debt. We could bring in not billions of dollars, but billions and billions and billions of dollars just from that stuff. And we are seeing the desire suddenly show up for our frequencies more and more so. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a big French aeronautical proposal. They wanted our 2-meter bands, or they wanted the European 2-meter bands and stuff. And we kind of put that down, although they still be out there. But if you guys have been following, you know that the FCC is considering taking away our participation in 3.5 gig, taking away our participation in 5 gig and stuff. All this is because of a combination of this 5G coming out. People want more and more spectrum for 5G. We're seeing more Internet of Things connected. Absolutely everything around here is now getting an IP address. That means more spectrum. A lot of the manufacturers are building now autonomous cars. The car of the future is not only going to be self-driving, but they're designed to actually be talking to each other and communicating with each other through IP addressing and internet. All that takes bandwidth. And guess who is sitting on a large chunk of bandwidth that is very, very interesting to them. And the truth is that the FCC is probably going to err on the side of money in pocket than they will on giving us protection of those bands. Although the emergency management is one of the strongest things that helps us as we get through and we start changing our mission in life and we start seeing more hardening of systems and things like that, we have to push constantly even to keep that as a forefront of why we do that. So the end of this is that when you think about it, there's only one organization out there that is protecting us. There's 700,000 amateur licensees in the country. There are 155,000 of those who are members of the league. So we have, although we are representing all 700,000 when we go talk to the FCC, we really only have a smaller portion of votes, maybe, member votes on the scene. They see 155,000 of us show up to do that. Now that helps, and we appreciate that. But what would really help is if we could grow that number and do that. And one of the best ways that you can help protect the spectrum, one of the best ways you can help make sure you still got a 2-meter frequency to chat on the way home, or whether or not we even have frequencies to do field day in a couple of years from now, is to give us a larger voice in DC. Those of you who are already members, we have the Spectrum Defense Fund, and we appreciate your donations because we use that money as best we can to protect those frequencies. But honestly, one of the 2 ways that you can best help, if you are not a member, if a friend of yours is not a member, if you've got a new ham that's coming in that's just getting licensed, paying that $49 and adding your name to our roster, when we grow that 150 to 200, 250, 300,000, we just now become a much, much bigger voice. And so, I mean, it gives us more bargaining. It gives us more strength to do that. So you not only get to be a member of the club, the group, get the magazines and stuff. And as John said earlier, if you join within the next week, we'll send you a door prize. They'll take away some of that stuff. So we want to encourage that. But I think we need to talk about that amongst our clubs. I know we talk about that over our ham breakfasts and things like that. You can have a lot of opinions about how the league is being run, whether there's something you would do different or whether not. And John and I are always willing to take that into consideration. Believe me, these last few trips that I've made up to Connecticut, I would sit there and say that half the time we are beating the drum in your favor and doing these things. But your membership, your numbers will really, really help do that. You see behind me, though, we don't want those little bands that are out there to disappear and stuff. And so I need for you guys to consider, if you've never joined before, if you've been on the wagon and stuff, you're thinking about whether or not to renew, you will help. You'll help yourself. You'll not only that, by giving us the strength to protect our bands so that we actually are not doing field day in a couple of years over Zello and stuff, or Slack and stuff, instead of being on the air because, you know, Ford Motor Company decided they really wanted the 20-meter band. You know, Toyota sit there and said, man, we could really sit there and use the 40-meter band and stuff. Those things were valuable resources to these folks. 2 meters, 440, huge interest out there for those bands and stuff. They lots of money and stuff. And we're going to have to be constantly pushing for and fighting for that. We're right now, I said, we're in a fight right now for 3.5 gig. We're going to be in a fight for 5 gig coming up and stuff, because that is right now, that's the spotlight. That's where everybody wants, because like I said, it's this Internet of Things, this autonomous automobile stuff that they've been talking about. That's the frequency area that they're interested in. and stuff, but it will just grow and just grow. And again, we cannot trust, well, let's put it, we can't depend on the FCC always weighing in favor of MCOM and amateur radio over a big check showing up in the mail next week, and to do that and stuff. So that's it. So anyway, I think that was kind of it. John, you brought the other thing up and stuff. I don't think there was anything else per se, but again, unless anybody has any specific questions or anything else, that was kind of my spiel for today.
Let me add something to that. I serve on two other committees. One is the legislative committee that deals with what legislation we are trying to prevent or we're trying to pass that favors amateur radio. I'm also on one of the legal committees that deals with issues that come up at the FCC. As Lee pointed out, we have 155 to 157,000 members on any given month. That's about 20 to 21% of the total number of licensed amateurs in the country. We hold the largest block of free frequencies other than the United States military in the world. They're free. We don't pay for them. And as Lee pointed out, there are people who are willing to pay for them, and it's in the billions of dollars. And Lee's comment about if we were to sell all our spectrum, assuming we could sell it, we'd pay off the national debt. He's right. So when we go to Congress or we go to the FCC, we're dealing with people who send $1,000 an hour lobbyists to the FCC and the Congress. And we show up, and the question is, who and what are we? They talk billions, we talk 157,000 members. Congress, the federal government pays attention to numbers as well as money. Even though we are chartered under 47 CFR 97.1 to be an emergency communications backup service, that doesn't necessarily overweigh money. If we do not maintain a presence, which the League is doing, with both FCC and Congress, then as Lee pointed out, all of the frequencies assigned to us will sooner or later disappear. So, and Mark, can you let me share one screen?
Sure. You should be able to do that now.
Yeah, let's see if it does. Hang on just a second. You may not. Tell it to share the screen. See if we'll bring it up. Let me make it come up. Can you see it now? Sources of funding?
Not
Nope.
yet.
Well, let's see here.
You hit that little share screen at the bottom.
It's not the one we want. Ah. It's not going to let me show this. Now, can you see sources of funding?
Nope.
Yeah, it's supposed to. Never mind. Let's drop it.
Okay.
Let's break it out because it won't show up.
You guys get some crayons and draw on the wall behind you, John.
I can come over to your place and draw on your head.
John's better with crayons.
Well, they don't let me play with them anymore. What I was going to put up is a slide that shows everyone what the sources of funding are. The League has 5 primary sources of funding. And from that, we provide all member services. We also pay for what we do at Congress and what we pay for at the FCC. Those 5 allocations are memberships, publications, and those are QST, QEX, NCJ, on the air, books, apparel. The third category is advertising in all the magazines and online. The fourth is donations, and the fifth is investment returns. Investment returns are what we receive off the money that has been donated to the League over time and that are in protected funds. Donations are just that. It's $1. It's contribution to the Diamond Club. It's people who leave us money or property in their wills. Membership accounts for 47% of our operating account. Only 47%. So each increase in members increases the amount of money we receive from that. So Membership alone don't pay for everything, but if memberships go down, then the other categories of publications and advertising will go down, because if we can't present enough possible recipients of the advertising to the advertisers, they'll reduce their advertising. So it is easy to complain about what we do or don't do, and it's fair to complain. If we don't hear requests for improvements or changes, then we won't know to make them. But at the end of the day, the league is the only game in town. If we don't exist, amateur radio will cease to exist. And if we cannot maintain a sufficiently large membership and use those funds to work with Congress and the federal agencies, then, as Lee pointed out, they'll keep taking frequencies. One new threat that is coming up that we've just started responding to the FCC on is remote charging of automobiles. This is a very big push by people who are creating electric vehicles, who have them now and they're creating more. They want to be able to do fast remote charging. And that generates, at the present, they're operating frequencies where they say they will not harm amateur radio. But we're concerned that the harmonics will damage amateur radio. We filed a response to a present FCC proceeding. We know that Tesla, Ford, General Motors will be making a very large push for this. And the key is to make certain that whatever they do doesn't roll into our frequencies or does not. Any question marks that have come up so far?
Yes, I have one that just popped in that says, any update on allowing technicians to use data in their CWHF allocation? Great question.
No, not yet. That's still a matter before the Programs and Services Committee.
So the idea, I guess, since I'm out of that loop, is the idea that technicians would be allowed to use it in the entire area they're allowed to use in CW bands, or
that is a request.
It's a request.
And it's a matter before the PSC and before the FCC, and we have no answer to that.
It is under consideration, though. I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, guys. So it's not like we're not ignoring it. It's just, it brings up as many questions as it answers at the same time.
I know one that usually pops up for us in our areas is that we tend to treat a technician as a stepping stone, and that we encourage people to step on that stone very shortly or very lightly, and that we intend to motivate folks to general. Just because the difference in operating is so huge between those two groups, and the difference in tests is so small. You know, I've seen numbers that the tests between tech and general about 80% about the same material. Is there any been, you know, I know this is going to be the big oh no, any simplification like combining tech and general or any of that kind of stuff floating around these days?
It's unlikely to occur. Back in, I think, 2004, the league proposed to the FCC that we recreate what essentially was a novice class. The FCC said no. It has been discussed with them since then. The response, again, this is not a formal filing, but we discussed it with them. The response is still no. If we change more than the 3 classes we've got, technician, general, and extra, they're going to have to modify their database and their entire structure. They don't want to make that massive of change just for 157,000 people in the country. It's unlikely that, I'd say it's probable, it will never occur that technician and general will be combined. And it is probably about 75% certain that we'll never be able to create another class. It'll be technician, general, and extra from this point on. What's interesting is that when we see exams given, somebody takes a tech exam who studied for it and takes it. If they then take the general, about 40% of them will pass the general exam without any further study. There have been proposals to simplify the technician exam, but that is not likely to occur. The FCC is not going to give us permission to do that. Lee, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say the other interesting thing that I've seen, at least down in South Texas. So we think about technicians wanting to move up into general next year. We kind of tend to think about contesting and QSOs and voice and logbook. But what I've seen down here is the technicians are moving into more digital modes. So we're seeing more digital stuff. But now we're seeing new technologies come out like Vera FM. And then along with Vera FM, there's Vera HF. So they get a taste of this technology, particularly the digital mode technologies in the VHF bands, and it whets their interest. And I'm seeing more and more people considering upgrading, not so much that they can sit there and get access to, I mean, some of it's contesting. Winter field day is kind of a big deal down here because people can do field day without sweating, melting away and stuff like that. But the drive to going toward HF is also because they like where the new digital technology is going to. And if people are starting to look at it outside what you might think the normal reason. And I think that's where Mark, where that question comes from, is it so much that we give the technicians the access to the band, or are these technicians saying, man, I'd really like to get into that, and this is a motivation for them to go ahead and get something they may not have ever thought about before because they were all digital lights and not really. So now they're looking at, oh, wow, wait a minute, there's a digital aspect to this I should look into and kind of get into and maybe spark that interest also. So we may be seeing that migration coming from a whole different perspective. With like I said, when the Winmore came out, Vera came out, we've got all this new stuff coming out, and they affect both the VHF and HF, and that interest, I think, is going to grow.
Well, he's correct. It's going to grow. On the recent 6-meter openings, it appears that most of the contacts on 6 meters were made by FT8 or FT4, not by sideband and CW.
There's that too.
But amateur radio changes over time. First there's AM, then sideband, and there was those awful sideband people coming in. And then sideband became if not dominant, at least equal to CW. Then there's now digital. There's room for everybody. But digital is driving a lot of people, bringing a lot of people into the hobby who would not have come in before. So that's beneficial to us.
John, on your piece, I'd never thought about the reason not to make changes in that licensing structure being the actual physical apparatus of the FCC, that changing that mode to add another class or removing another class would be so prohibitive to make that happen. We hear, like you said, on the 40% can pass the test without going on. We here tend to really just push people and say, look, get tech in general and as one fell swoop, don't stop until you get both of them, because the licensed hams see the benefit in going to the general. And, the first guys are saying, I'll just quit at the first test, but we kind of package them as one. We encourage people to take both tests and don't stop until they get the second. Now the extra, they can get that on their own time, but man, you get so much more bang out of that general for those frequencies, especially digital. And we're seeing so many people that want to show up with a Raspberry Pi and talk to the world, and they're doing it.
You go back to the FCC and you're talking about limitation on new license classes that we're talking about. There's another issue. There are a lot of pending, I forget how many of them. Well, somewhere between 6 to 10 pending FCC petitions requesting the FCC to make rulings. There's one that was filed by, I think, Expert Amps asking to remove the 15 decibel limitation on amplification on amplifiers that's left over from the CB era. And none of them have moved for years. And you would ask, why aren't we important enough for these to move? It's because we're 157,000 people. The person at the Wireless Bureau that was assigned to dealing with amateur radio matters retired. That was Scott Stone. He was licensed ham. The person who replaced him is not licensed. That doesn't mean he can't handle the responsibilities. He can. He's been very cooperative, very friendly. But the amount of time and personnel it takes for the FCC to deal with a petition filed by the league or by an amateur, or in this case, to use Expert Amps, is the same amount of time, the same amount of personnel it takes to handle a major FCC filing by pick AT&T. The procedures within the FCC for considering any rulemaking petition, well, they're not exactly arcane, but they're very complicated, very procedural. Each petition's got to go through a number of steps for review by different departments. It comes up for votes. It takes a lot of personnel, a lot of time. So they have been over the past few years reluctant to devote that much time to what they consider one small issue. We don't think it's small, they do. So they made a decision before Scott Stone left to bundle all the amateur radio petitions, even though they weren't related to each other, bundle them in one big proceeding and pass them all out. That was to have happened last fall, we thought by November. But then Scott Stone announced he was going to retire, and it all went into a side table. And then Chinese virus showed up. And we don't know how long that's going to delay any of these petitions. The FCC, just like everyone else, is not going to, almost everyone at the FCC is working remote. By the way, they're happy with it. They turned out quite well. They've issued a recent ruling, according to our FCC attorney, that, a recent notice actually, that the employees don't have to come back yet. So they're still working remote. And that, just like it does at the league, it reduces how much they can get done. So we have multiple issues with the FCC in that if we want to change rules, it will take a long time because they're going to combine it with other issues. So you combine we don't want to redo our database to, okay, we'll look at your issue, but we're going to wait until we get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 issues before we do it. It is unrealistic to expect that we can change anything in the near future. It's actually unrealistic to think we're going to change the license classes, I think, at all. Mark, did you have another question?
Have none at this time.
In that case, we're going to start charging everyone for listening to us. When I go from FCC to legislative, as I think most people know, in Texas and Oklahoma, we have been active in either opposing or submitting legislation at the Oklahoma legislature and the Texas legislature to either prevent bills like distracted driving bills that would interfere with amateur radio, or to obtain legislation that would benefit us. In 2014, the ARRL filed a bill with Congress attempting to deal with private land use restrictions. Because, you know, if you buy a home in a subdivision, most of those subdivisions have restrictions, and those restrictions prohibit outdoor or exterior antennas. The bill was filed in 2014. It's passed the House twice. It was refiled in January this year. It actually was refiled without our knowledge. The bill over time had been amended to the point, over the opposition of quite a few of us at headquarters, to the point the bill was more detrimental to us than it was beneficial. So when as many of you know, there was a major change in the 2019 time period, where a lot of directors were replaced. At that point, we withdrew the old bill, which was called ARPA, Amateur Radio Parity Act. It was not a Parity Act bill. It would have, in my opinion, the opinion of all the lawyers that looked at it, probably eliminated amateur radio in any subdivision in the United States for the rest of our natural life. We withdrew the bill, went back to our congressional sponsors to explain why, and we have drafted a new bill that has now been accepted by our sponsors in the House and the Senate. And we're working to pick up enough sponsors in the House and Senate so that we can go ahead and file a bill. The intent was to have filed it in the spring, but then Chinese virus showed up. Congress started distancing itself and everything went on hold. We're still talking to our Senate sponsors. The lead sponsor in the Senate, Senator Wicker. Lead sponsor in the House is a gentleman out of Connecticut, and Adam Kinzinger also. I believe it's Congressman Courtney out of Connecticut and Congressman Kinzinger on the House side. We're trying to pick up more sponsorships. We've talked to the senators from Oklahoma, both of them. We've talked to, I think, everyone in the Oklahoma legislative, our congressional delegation, except for one gentleman. We've talked to about half the Texas delegation. And the response to the changed bill has been very good. Talking about the Chinese virus is what is it said? It's an ill wind that blows no good. One of the benefits that to amateur radio of virus has been that federal government and state governments have had to determine what are critical businesses, what is critical infrastructure. When the national emergency was declared in March, the Department of Homeland Security was tasked with determining what was critical infrastructure across the United States. On March 25th, if I'm correct, I believe March 25th, 2019, they issued their guidance. And amateur radio was determined to be part of critical communications infrastructure. Because the law that created amateur radio always said we were part of critical infrastructure. It didn't do us that much good. A lot of people didn't pay attention to the statute, ignored it, didn't understand how prevalent that was. But when DHS, actually it's the cybersecurity division, they issued the guidance, said these are the critical infrastructure workers and identified amateur radio, it gave us an immense amount of support that we've been using in Congress. Because now it's the federal government saying we really are that important. And if we really are that important and we are critical infrastructure, then why should government permit homeowners associations to tell Kevin, Lee, or anyone else, you can't have an exterior antenna? So it's been very beneficial in talking to senators and congressmen. It's kind of a golden nugget that's going to us. Doesn't guarantee we get passed because in this session, because there's so many bills dealing with the coronavirus, so much backed up legislation because Congress has not been able to meet, and we have an election year. Even if we get the bill filed this year, it may be next year before we actually get on the floor. But at least it has resulted in a federal declaration that we are critical to communications. Before I go any further, Mark, you have any more questions?
So that federal declaration and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Is that?
No, actually it's better than that. When Department of Homeland Security made that declaration, it was facing probable lockdowns at state and federal level. The question was, if it's locked down, how do you move? How do you work if you're critical? How do you go to work if you're part of critical infrastructure? There's a letter that came out with the directive that said, basically, to whom it may concern, please give all consideration to the person carrying this letter. They are part of critical infrastructure and they have permission to move without regard to lockdown. That letter was given to, or in Texas Department of Emergency Management sent that letter to every amateur radio group and said, if your people are called out, give them the letter. They can go past roadblocks and deal with anyone. Other states have not issued it to everyone, but it's Department of Homeland Security made it clear that if you're critical infrastructure and you need to move, that letter would be available to you. So it's more than $5 and we'll get you a cup of coffee.
Get a free coffee. No, I remember now that you roll that together. I remember that was pushed out that once you were called in, that was part of it. So yeah, that's a good feather to have in the hat for future negotiations, shall we say.
In talking to Congress in the past, when we've talked to them and go, look, we're amateur radio, we provide emergency communications, and everyone went, that's nice. This time when we show up with the Department of Homeland Security guidance and go, guys, please read the following, they go, oh. So it's likely that we'll pick up more sponsors. We have a better chance for the bill because now, even though they could have read the statutes before, now they have the Department of Homeland Security making it clear. No guarantees.
No, but if I may, John, that it's a follow up on why we took the MCOM manager position and made it a director position is that we have known that for years, the league has kind of put its emphasis on emergency communications secondary to other things up there. And that has not gone unnoticed by a lot of our federal served agencies and stuff. So now with this letter of declaration out here, now with us having a real, a director level position to interface with them, now that they're hopefully we're going to follow this up with some very strong public outreach to the served agencies that, hey, we're here, we're real, we're back, we're not going away anywhere. That stuff, it will all kind of come together in a package to sit there and maybe help give us, a little bit more of that presence when you do go back to the legislature. The DHS guys, the FEMA guys, all these guys. Oh yeah, I know your director was over here talking about that, or we talked to this person, or we noticed that you have got this program that we're really, really interested in being a part of. It all comes together to raise our presence, and that of course gives us, again, if I can use a political term, gives us more gravitas when we do go talk to some of these legislative folks in the future.
To underscore what Lee is saying, there have been a group of us on the board who have been arguing the league was not paying sufficient attention to emergency communication for providing it the support it needed for years. We now have amassed enough votes and enough control. Besides creating the position of Director of Emergency Communications, at this last board meeting last week, we have started the procedure to create a third standing committee. Again, the committees are Administration, Finance, Programs, and Services. Program and Services covers contesting, DX, as well as income. But I think, Lee, you said in the last meeting of a 2-hour meeting, 5 minutes was devoted to emergency communications.
If that much.
But because that's been occurring, we created what will become known as the Emergency Communications Field Service Committee. It won't come into existence until January. There is the committee that was charged with recommending and hiring an emergency communications director is responsible for setting up the protocols and the scope of work for the committee. But come January, we expect that there will be a committee whose sole responsibility will be field service and emergency communications. So there'll be a lot more support from the league for what we do with ARRLs and NTS.
John, we got a couple questions. First one is from Dan W5ZT and wants to know what the name of the legislation, the proposed legislation that you're talking about is. The proposed name for the proposed.
Sorry to laugh. There's an internal argument of what we ought to call it. We're not going to use ARPA. The rule at headquarters is if you say the word ARPA, we hit you. And the reason we do that is because the bill was so bad and so damaging that we don't want to have any association with the old bill. There's an internal name that's been used on the bill, but in terms of a public name, we haven't put one on it. We drafted 3 different bills to show the Congress. Differences in the bills was how extensive or how detailed they were. And one of the bills was actually named as the Freedom of Communications Act. We don't know if that will stick or not. It comes down to what our sponsors are willing to run with. But we don't intend to use anything like that because of the unfortunate connotations. But by the time if we drop the bill within the next couple of months, we'll come up with a name. But one of the ones has been Freedom of Communications Act.
Okay, so it's untitled at this point, but that's going forward.
Well, because we're waiting for our sponsors to get all our sponsors in place. Everyone's agreed to the language so far, so we don't need to worry about making any changes before we file it. We'll come up with the name when we actually release it and the sponsors sign off on it.
Very good. Second question is Michael Delaney, KB5HXT. It says, are you saying that all amateur radio operators who may wish to operate in an emergency should have an identification or an ID card?
No. You're not required to have an ID card by any organization. If you show up at certain EOCs, you're going to have to be vetted. and be authorized to come in. But if you're just participating in ARRLs or NTS, no, you don't have. There's no proposal you would have to have an ID card.
And there's no clearinghouse, or there's no one emergency communications clearinghouse for any of that either. I mean, there's no mechanism for that, is there?
There's no mechanism for it. Lee, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Mark, I said the problem with that is by the way, I would love to see a nationally recognized ID card that is been blessed by people like FEMA and DHS and stuff. So it does give us something that just like the feds have, that's a standard recognized ID card. I really would like to see us do that. But here's the problem we come up with, sadly, is that even in like our area where I've got like multiple counties and multiple cities, getting them all to agree on what would that card look like and who would issue that card. And by the way, whose background check are you going to accept? Are you going to accept Travis County's? Are you going to accept Seguin's? Are you going to accept the Department of Public Safety? We can't even get to that level of agreement and stuff. So the problem at the local level is that you've got so many different jurisdictions, so many different counties, and they all want theirs to be the authority of stuff. So it's going to have, if it ever happens, it's going to have to come from the federal side down. This is another one of those things that, hey, FEMA, you know, can you work with us on something like that? Hey, DHS, can you help us with? We really feel there's a value to having a nationally recognized that. And by the way, and don't shoot the message on this one, I also believe a standard uniform, a standard look and feel. I always sit there and say, anytime a Salvation Army person walks into any EOC, you know they're Salvation Army. Anytime a Red Cross person walks into an EOC, you immediately know they're Red Cross. They are visible. They have a brand. They're there. We don't have that per se. So there's no real like, oh, when you walk in, oh yeah, that guy over there in the pink and green silk shirt, obviously he's amateur radio because he's got on a jockey shirt. And so we need to develop that kind of standard over that, you know. And then underneath that, you've got the local modifications, if you will, adjustments to fit your local environment. But we've never been able to set an acceptable, recognizable standard at the top down. And I think that's one of the things next year we need to focus with our served agencies.
Yeah, we had a comment from Mr. Miller that says W5 EDM, that says an ID for amateur radio operator would be a good thing. Most responders are either uniformed or carry credentials of some kind. I know I carry probably 6 or some. You've got one on your shirt, Lee, that I've got one similar to that. And, you know, we all carry an amateur radio license, and, you know, that piece of paper, nobody's going to look at. The state of Oklahoma issues an ID that can be used for amateur radio operators, but I've yet to see one person in uniform having any idea what this ID, communications ID, is used for in Oklahoma. So right. Yeah, you're right. It's going to have to come from a FEMA kind of thing, and I don't see FEMA getting everybody together and backgrounds and all that stuff. Yeah, two follow-ups on Mark. But by the way, first of all, I want to put out a kudos to Mark Conklin. I was at Dayton a couple of years ago, and one of the federal agency guys, he referred to this as our gang colors. He said, you guys show up with your gang colors on, and we have no dang idea what your gang colors mean. Stuff, okay? And so I give kudos to Oklahoma and Mark for coming up with the military ranking. Do that, because when I walk in, whether this is red or green or blue or orange, they have no idea what that is. But if they look underneath it and they see 2 pips or 3 pips, well, they're all public safety. They all know what that means and stuff. And so it's another area. This is great for us. We all know what this means, but believe it or not, most public service guys, they have no clue and stuff as what the heck that actually means and stuff. And I always thought it was kind of funny. Like I said, it got referred to as us showing up on our gang colors and stuff.
Well, and most of them don't understand, like if you've got a district emergency coordinator, they don't know who that is. They don't understand what that hierarchy is.
Right.
And when you have that military dongle under there, then they have some idea of where this person is in the pecking order.
Well, and Mark Conklin just jumps in and says he's never had a trooper know what the Oklahoma ham ID card is. So yeah, that's the same thing. He's seen it all over the state. I'm sure more than I have. And we've got an ID, it's just not worth much.
And that's one of the tasks, as Lee pointed out, that the new MCOM director will be working on. Because besides working with field service and NTS in the areas, that person is going to be tasked with working with federal agencies to improve our recognition or position there. And there will be, as you pointed, we'll be looking at, can we come up with an ID that will be accepted? What will the criteria be? How do we implement it? Because
and since they have designated us, as necessary infrastructure, then at that point,
critical. The word critical.
Yeah, but there becomes the argument to either DHS or whoever, FEMA, that they need to credential us in some form or fashion so that people will understand what we are. That becomes the argument.
No, it is the argument. We just have someone appear at the agencies and lobby for us, and that's where we intend to go. Mark, do you have another question?
I have nothing else at this point.
How good are you?
Well, that's what my wife has been saying for many years.
John, do you want to go back over the requirements for the new memberships in the book? Because I don't know if you mentioned the email portion of that before we ran out of time.
Yeah, but let's go back over it. If anyone who's listening to the sound of our voices, if you renew your membership or if you join the league, between now and next Saturday, we'll send you a free book, free cap, depends on what we have in inventory. If you are an existing member and your membership has not expired, it's okay. If you renew your membership, it adds on to the existing membership. You don't lose it.
But we need to tell us so that when headquarters sees you, because you'll renew online through the ARRL website, but then we need to tie you together that you came in through this HamFest so we can get you the book. So you got to let us know that you did renew online so that we can tell, headquarters when they see it, let us know that it came through so we can reach out to you.
Thank you very much. I doxed both.
Send an email to me.
I doxed both of you and put your emails in the comments list. So I should be able to, hopefully we'll just run you out of caps. That would be just really great.
Caps, books, whatever, we'll be happy to do it.
See,
the reason we have these things.
I feel slighted because I'm a life member, so I can't renew. I guess I can.
What we tell everyone is that we guarantee if you buy a second life membership, you'll live forever.
That's right.
I guess I could renew somebody else's license. That might be.
If you have the decency to die, well, you can't sue us. It doesn't matter.
I have suggested, Mark, that we need a higher level. Like the NRA, after you become a life member, you become a benefactor member, then become an endowment member, then become a member of the Patriots Forever amateur radio member. We just need more life memberships.
Just stack it up taller.
That way you can participate more.
Well, you can also donate to the foundation for that matter.
That's true.
That's true.
Mark Conklin added a piece that said that ID that we're pie in the sky generating should be one that meets the real ID standards. So
oh yeah, definitely.
As we're going forward, making something we can't afford or can't come up with, that would be a big thing. Obviously the right answer would be put out the amateur radio license in a real ID format with a picture, but that's not going to happen.
I will tell a quick story here just to point about this whole ID thing. We did a airport drill down here a couple of years ago where we faked an airplane crash and had all these victims and everything. And it was a secure area. And one of our guys, he had his daughter's Red Cross swimming card that she had got when she passed her basic swimming, walked up to the guy and held it up there and said, Red Cross, I'm here to handle the victims. And they said, okay. And just wandering right on through and stuff. So that lack of standardization means that all these people who are supposed to be doing their job, they have no idea what half this stuff is and stuff. And so it's interesting. Sometimes you can't get through no matter what you have, and other times your daughter's swimming card will get you through. So it's an interesting discussion to have over time.
And John, we've got at least one email going your way that says they've renewed, so you've got one going.
We're almost out of time. If we have any more questions, any questions are good.
I don't see any at this point, but yeah, it's been a great set of questions. Any final wrap-ups that that anybody wants to put through? Mark, you have any, or Kevin, you have any traffic manager jobs open that people might want to apply for?
As a matter of fact, I have a section traffic manager's job open. It has been open for quite a while. I personally don't know the players in that group, and if they would like their stuff reported to headquarters for Brass Pounders League and stuff like that, then they need to come up with a section traffic manager. But because I can't do it all, and so we really need you guys to step up if you want a warm body like that. So the job's not hard. It's just primarily compiling data that comes in each month from the different nets. So and then sending all that off to headquarters. So, but if anybody's interested, drop me an email.
Very good.
And Mark, both Lee and I will make a point along with Kevin. If anyone in the section, anyone not in the Oklahoma section, has a question about the league or a concern or a complaint, email us.
Yep.
Kevin, even if you don't put it in the chat room, if you look at QST on page 16, you find Kevin's email address and phone numbers. If you look on page 15, you'll find Lee's and mine. And we're always interested in talking to members.
That's good. That's, the good messages are just as easy to send forward as the bad, and the good messages are harder to see. I know I get a lot of messages that come through that are, just little thanks messages, and they mean a lot to a project and keep moving it on. And they're always great to see. I guess my big follow-up ending, I'll wrap up kind of thing is, where do you see us going next year as far as Hamfest? John, you and I talked yesterday, and I think you know that the rest of the year schedule for Hamfest as a general. Has anybody looked out towards 2021 to see what that's going to involve for all those?
Everyone has the same concern, and that is they don't know. There may be some small Hamfests between now and the end of the year, but there are no formal announced Hamfests in the West Gulf, Oklahoma and Texas. They've all been canceled. As far as I know from other divisions, anything of any size has been canceled. Although the Hamcom group is planning for Hamcom, Orlando's planning for Hamcation, they're planning for Pacificon, and they certainly are planning for Dayton. Everyone's walking on thin ice. If the second wave of the Chinese virus comes through in the fall, which is expected, and then dies out into the spring like a normal flu, then everyone expects the distancing limitations will go away. We'll go back to semi-normal life. But no one knows. The virus keeps slightly mutating. When they think it's tamped down, it pops back up again. Lethality of it has been, they think, going down. That don't take that as medical advice from West Gulf, by the way. But the degree to which it's contagious appears to be increasing. It's just no one knows anywhere around the world. Everyone says this is going to happen, and they're proven wrong. But all the major Hamfests, even the smaller ones, are planning for next year.
Yep.
I think in January we'll know. We'll at least know which ones are going to try to open up.
Yeah, I know that in planning this and chasing down Ham Holiday, I remember early on when Dayton was canceled, I was so excited that July would be all over and we would be the first Ham Fest that would be up and running, and off we go. And here we go with a change on that. So I guess there's anybody, my other side of that is anybody planning to go straight online or do they have a backup plan? You know, we did this here to keep it going for a year to see what's going on. But have you heard of anybody else thinking about an online Dayton or an online Hamcation or a hybrid Hamcation or something?
No. Yeah. As I said, this is, I believe, the first Hamfest has tried to do it online. You've got the large international one that's coming up in about 2 weeks. It's not running on Zoom, it's running on a custom platform. But people are going to start testing water, see how well it works. But in terms of trying to replace the existing Hamfest, no. Everyone's still trying to understand the logistics. And I don't know how you run Dayton.
Yeah.
So far.
By the way, that QSO that's come up a couple of weeks may set a tone, Mark, because I understand that not only will they have presentations like this, they're going to have separate breakout rooms. But the part I'm really going to be curious about is they're going to have virtual booths. So you can sit there and take a tour of the floor and go to each booth in a virtual manner, just as if you were walking the floor at Dayton and stuff. And if you're curious, they've already got 12,000 people who've signed up for that to attend the Hamfest. And so they may be setting a standard for future stuff going on, regardless of what goes on elsewhere. They may be blazing new grounds for people to try stuff. You know, do you want to virtually attend a Japanese Hamfest? Do you want to virtually attend figure shopping and stuff? If they set that tone and it works, they may go ahead and you might see hybrids in the future where, you know, I can't afford to go to Germany, but hey, I can log in and I can attend the Hamfest virtually along with other people who are there physically and stuff. And so it's like the VE sessions, I think we're changing it forever and how we'll be doing future VE sessions. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out of this regardless of where Mr. Virus goes, that I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of modifications to how business is done moving forward.
I think everybody wants to do this. Everyone misses being able to get together. It's a lot more fun when we all get together in one place and can talk and go through the Hamfest.
Yeah, I think our Ham Holiday Oklahoma City, we had a big focus on forums, and I think that let us do this piece very nicely. But it's the Hamfest. It's, you know, finding that 30-cent part in the bundle of stuff that you need to finish that project, and that's the thing we can't replace very easily. Two, three things. Sam Smith's KO5 SAM says that he's heard Joplin is still having the flea market, and I know what they're doing is a $5 table, a $5 parking spot for vendors, and you work out of your trunk and free to show up to go do that. And that's all at the Joplin Hamfest online piece up there. So that's a way to get that piece going. Mark Conklin's story is Green Country is planning, but until the COVID-19 is done, it's all vaporware kind of problem. And,
yeah, everyone's trying to find a way to adjust, just like Joplin's doing.
Yeah. And the question on Lee on that virtual conference, do you have any contact information or something to Google for that? Is that Germany?
If you'll go to the ARRL website, it's posted up there. It's called something like the QSO Hamfest. I forget the exact official name, but there it is up on the ARRL website as a link so that you can go and register for it. That would be that would probably be the easiest way then to sit there, so you can just click on.
Okay, we'll take that out. We're hitting time, guys. I appreciate it. Anybody have any last minute words before we move on to DX?
Mark, I just posted in the chat room the link to the
got it.
So party that Lee's talking about.
Got it.
And Mark, I just want to thank you for coming up with this and giving us the opportunity to do this. It at least kind of makes it feel like normal to a certain extent.
Yeah, it is. You're very welcome, and we're happy to do it. And I hope to say we won't do it again, but we'll try. We'll try to do it in person.
I think we all hope we don't have to do it again.
I think you're exactly right. Thank you very much
Right, thank you again.
appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Kevin, thanks.